We are continuing in the Gospel of Luke. We'll be ending chapter 20 and starting chapter 1, so you could join me and encourage you to follow along in your copy of God's Word at Luke chapter 20, verse 45. So Luke 20, 45, and we'll be going through chapter 21, verse 4 today. And the title for this morning's sermon is Rejecting Hypocrisy and Embracing Obscurity. Rejecting Hypocrisy, Embracing Obscurity. So if you will, hear God's word from starting at Luke 20, verse 45, and after I finish reading, I'll say, "This is the word of the Lord," and you'll say, "Thanks be to God." While all the people were listening, he said to his disciples, "Beware of the scribes who want to go around in long robes and who love greetings in the marketplace, the best seats in the synagogues, and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and say long prayers just for show. These will receive harsher judgment." Jesus looked up and saw the rich dropping their offerings into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow dropping in 2 tiny coins. "Truly I tell you," he said, "this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For all these people have put in gifts out of their surplus, but she, out of her poverty, has put in all she had to live on." This is the word of the Lord. Let's pray. Our God and Father, you are the one who deserves all honor and glory. In this story that you are writing scene by scene, you are center stage. And so I pray that by your Holy Spirit this morning, each one of us would be happy to play the background, happy to be on the backstage as we focus our minds and hearts on your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. And so, Lord, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and redeemer. Amen. There are certain book titles that grab your attention. There's actually like a handful of books that I've never read, but the titles have instructed me and they just stuck with me. Book titles like The Body Keeps the Score. Never read that book. That's just a killer title. The Body Keeps the Score. It's on trauma and healing. Or this from a Catholic writer, The Wounded Healer. Isn't that deep? The Wounded Healer. It makes me think of Jesus. Makes me think about before we could be a healer for others, we have to go through our own wounds. Well, I came across a book like this week. I did not read it, and yet the title caught my attention. It's called Embracing Obscurity. It was written in 2012. It's a book on Christian humility, Embracing Obscurity. And that caught my attention. And the author really put his or her money where their mouth is because they wrote it anonymously. One of the few books that you'll see on our day and age that just has anonymous on it. Embracing Obscurity. It caught my attention, but I don't really like that title. Embracing smallness. Embracing forgottenness. I would rather embrace a cactus or hug a hungry black bear. I hate obscurity, run from it. I want credit for what I've done, right? Even if it's a little thing at home, like doing the dishes. I want, someone in the family like, "Oh, thanks. Yeah, I see that." Like, yeah, I did do that. We don't want to embrace obscurity. We live in a culture that rejects obscurity. Never mind the fact that each one of us, we're 1 in 8.1 billion people on God's green earth. We want our pictures and our workouts liked online. We want to be honored and seen at work, in our homes, out in the community. The fact is, our lives are small. Most of what we do is unseen. And the question is, how will we respond to that? With our smallness, with our littleness, will we scratch and claw for our little corner on fame to be respected and seen? Or will we delight in the fact that we are servants in the kingdom of God? Well, this morning in Luke, Jesus gives us a warning and an encouragement. He'll give us a warning against the scribes who are proud, hypocritical, and love to be center stage. And then he'll give us an encouragement and point to this widow who gives her all to God, even though no one is watching. And my prayer this morning is that God would change our hearts from rejecting obscurity, those little ways that God calls us to serve behind the scenes, to embracing it by his Spirit. We see in this text that Jesus himself honors small, unseen acts done with great love. Our Lord honors small and unseen acts done with great love. So let's start first at verse 45, warning against hypocritical living. Let me set the scene a little bit. So Jesus has come into Jerusalem. It's Passover time. He's in conflict with the spiritual leaders in Jerusalem. They're questioning his claims to be the Messiah, and yet he's refuting them left and right. So we're just coming off a few scenes where Jesus himself is in the temple. People are coming to worship Yahweh. They're putting in their gifts, and yet these religious leaders are trying to catch him in error, but they can't do it. And so now Jesus turns the tables on them, and it says, okay, question time is over. And in a crowd, he turns to his disciples, and he gives them a warning and says, disciples, I don't want you to be like those scribes who are just questioning me. Jesus shows us something really important here, that we could talk that talk all day long, but he's really concerned about how we walk that walk. These scribes were all about the intricacies of theology, and theology is important, but it's meant to land in our lives. And so he doesn't point out errors in their theology, even though they have some errors. He points out the errors in their lifestyle. And so he turns to the disciples and says, don't be like these scribes who are self-obsessed, self-centered. We see that in verse 45. While all the people were listening, he said to his disciples, beware of the scribes. Now, what Jesus is going to do is he's kind of going to air their laundry out. He's going to give 6 actions that the scribes do that he's saying, don't be like that. Don't act like them. Live like them. The first one is, he says, they want to go around in long robes. They want to go around in long robes. Now, before some of the more zealous among us go home and throw away our bathrobes, robes aren't bad in and of themselves. In fact, they are quite comfy. They're a gift from God. No, these were most likely extravagant robes that these scribes wore out in public to show off their self-importance and their worth. I was thinking about a modern equivalent. I don't know if you've heard of the Instagram account Preachers and Sneakers. Anyone? Preachers and Sneakers? Okay, here we go. We got a few in the house. But yeah, Preachers and Sneakers is this dude who just goes around, takes pictures of celebrity preachers and whatever sneakers they're wearing, and then goes on Amazon or online. It's like, all right, here's the price tag on that. So he's just exposing preachers left and right, but it's like, that was $1,000 Louis Vuitton, like leather, gator leather sneakers. So Jesus is saying, don't be like that, disciples. Don't show off your self-importance or try to grab worth or attention going around in long robes. The second action he condemns is they love greetings in the marketplace. This isn't your average hi from someone you know at Market Basket. This was a more formal, reverential greeting that the scribes wanted people to give them in the marketplace. So they're saying, don't be like that. They also love the best seats in the synagogues. They're not your back row Baptists. They love to be the center of attention wherever that was in the temple. And at banquets, they love to have the places of honor. Some translations say they love the first seats and the first places at banquets. They would be kind of like that uncle at your wedding banquet who go up to the wedding party's table and grabs a seat. You're like, Unc, what are you doing here? This is for the wedding party. You know, they're seeking the best places at banquets in these public places. And notice these first few places, marketplaces, synagogues, banquets, these are all public spheres. These scribes are living for their self-image, promoting their self-image in public spaces. Now this next action that Jesus condemns is a little odd. It doesn't seem like it fits in this list. He says, they devour widows' houses. This is not necessarily a public thing, and we don't really know what exactly Luke was intending to say by devour widows' houses. It might have to do with something of the scribes taking advantage of property or using the properties of widows' homes to get financial advantage. It's most likely something like that. And so what's this have to do with the other things of loving a public persona and devouring resources and the needy in private? Well, one of the things I'm thankful for as a pastor here is that we have a sermon collab with 2 other churches. And one of the other pastors pointed the connection between these 2 condemned actions out, and it was really helpful. Pastor Rob said, if we try to impress the greatest of these, we will abuse the least of these. If we try to impress and to live for the greatest of these out in the public square, we will abuse or use the least of these in private. And so that's what Jesus is calling out here. In public, they put on a show. They want everyone's attention. They want the rich and famous attention so they could become more rich and famous. But in private, they are treating God's precious ones, the least of these, like garbage. You may have heard stories. I'm not too into Hollywood gossip and stuff, but of people meeting movie stars or star athletes who treat them like human garbage. This is kind of the feel of how the scribes are treating the widows who they're taking advantage of. And that just isn't a Hollywood problem. That isn't a scribe problem. That is our own heart issue as well. I wonder, who are those people in your life who you see as no advantage to you? People who won't help your social status at all. And how do you treat them? Finally, the last action Jesus condemns is in verse 47. He says, they say long prayers just for show. Again, long prayers does not equal bad. Jesus himself on multiple occasions prayed all night. Public prayers in and of themselves are not bad. Jesus prayed publicly. But long and public prayers to be seen and praised for how good of a prayer you are, that's what Jesus is condemning. So he's saying they pray just for a show. Prayer is meant to be fellowship with you and your Father, and they're putting on a show for those who are there. So how do we sum up these 6 actions that Jesus condemns? Well, one put it like this: these scribes have a consuming zeal for attention. Their religion isn't worship of God, but worship of self. And in all these things, the heart is the issue. Their God is their own glory. Now notice in verse 45, Jesus says this to his disciples. While all the people were listening, he said to his disciples, beware of the scribes. I think that's really important for us to get. He's not rebuking the scribes directly, but he's telling his disciples, look at how these guys are living. Don't emulate them. Don't follow their example. And that's important because many of these scribes had wealth, had influence, and the majority of the disciples didn't have wealth or influence. They were back alley, blue-collar fishermen, most of them. There's probably an exception or two of more wealthy disciples, but on the whole, these were lower income, day laborers. And yet, Jesus warns them against the sin of seeking attention, to be the center of attention and praise. And I think this is instructive for us as God's people, that whether we are rich or poor, young or old, single or married, we all have a self-focus problem. Whether our kingdom is big or our kingdom is tiny, we want to rule the roost. And in fact, in Luke chapter 22, this is so sad because I see myself in the disciples. In Luke chapter 22, after the first Lord's table, after the first communion, when Jesus broke the bread and said, this is my body for you, took the cup, said, this is my blood shed for you. After that, it says in Luke 22, the disciples were arguing to see who was the greatest. On the eve of Jesus' crucifixion, these poor men who didn't have tons of money were still arguing, who's the greatest? Who's done the most for Jesus? Who does Jesus love the most? And so we see, no matter your social status, no matter your economic status, we all have this bent to gain attention and praise. It's the sin of selfishness. And Jesus is calling the disciples away from it, and when we fall into it, to repent of it. Another way to talk about the sin of the scribes is hypocrisy. Now, if you're a Christian, most of us are here. If you're not, welcome. Love having you here. But if you're a Christian, you've probably heard people say, man, Christians are such hypocrites. Like that's probably top 5 criticisms of Christians in the church, right? Hypocrites. Well, many Christians are, and yet I think sometimes people equate being a sinner with being a hypocrite, right? And those two things aren't the same. Like, if I said, I'm a great person, I never raise my voice, never have a harsh word, never have an evil or impure thought, and then I was doing all those things, that would be hypocrisy. But if you say, I'm a mess, I'm a total sinner, and I need Jesus to put my life back together, and then you sin, confess your sin and follow him, that's not hypocrisy. That's just walking out the Christian life. But these scribes were truly hypocrites. And hypocrisy at its heart is putting on a mask, presenting one way on the outside and yet being different on the inside. We all put on a mask, whether out of fear or pride. We're afraid that if people see us for who we actually are, they'll reject us. Or out of pride, we want to be respectful, respected by others and honored, so we hide our weaknesses and flaws. Jesus calls out the hypocrites in Matthew 15. He says, "You hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me.'" So this is what the scribes are doing. They're honoring God with their lips at their teachings at the temple, honoring God with their lips, with their prayers, and yet their hearts are far from God. They don't want God to be worshiped. When it's all said and done, they want to be worshiped. So what are the results of this hypocrisy? We see in verse 47. One, it's a little bit more implicit in the text, but it says they say long prayers just for show. I would put this result of hypocrisy as they're far from God. Religious hypocrisy is terrifying because we could deceive ourselves. We could act like we're close to God and yet be far from him. And so it's just a terrible trade-off. Earlier in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is talking about prayer, and he's saying, when you pray just to be heard and to be respected as a good prayer, you receive your reward, which means people praise you and say, wow, that's so awesome. That's such a small reward. But he's saying, if you go in secret and you pray because you simply want to be with your Father, you'll receive a greater reward. And that's being with your Father in communion with him. So when we're hypocrites, we are far from God and others. We're not truly known. We put on a mask. And then he talks about that these scribes will receive harsher judgment. They'll receive harsher judgment for their hypocrisy. One of the ways that the Bible talks about the coming judgment of King Jesus is that he is going to reveal everything for what it really is. So if hypocrites are holding up their masks, on the day of Christ's return, he will take away all masks, and everyone will be shown for who they truly are, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But there is good news for hypocrites. There's gospel for hypocrites. Because you can hide from people, but you can't fool Jesus. He sees past our masks, and here's the good news. He still loves us. Romans 5 says that while we were still sinners, while we were still weak, the two things we want to hide in our shame, Christ died for us. God shows his love for us. While we were weak, while we were sinners, while we're at our worst, hiding both, Jesus came and took on the punishment for our sin, and he covers us in our shame. So of course, all of us are hypocrites in certain areas. None of us have 100% integrity. But if there's any of you who are just hiding behind a mask and God is putting pressure on you saying, come out, share that sin with me, share that sin with a trusted friend, a brother or sister in the Lord, there is good news and hope for you because Jesus sees past that mask and he still loves you. I love how one pastor says it, Ray Orland. He says, we all face a choice. We can be impressive or known, but not both. And this really touches home on Christian community. You could either seek to be impressive or known, but you can't have it both ways. You could fight to be impressive by dumbing down your weaknesses, hiding your sins, elevating all the good that you do, but you won't be known by those around you. Or you could lead out in weakness, boast in your weakness like the Apostle Paul. Confess your sin to trusted brothers and sisters and be truly known and loved. So we see that Jesus warns us against the scribes, their pride, their hypocrisy. And remember, he's in the temple, so he kind of steps back for a second, gives up that warning and starts looking around and what's going around at the temple. And here he gives us an example of a beautifully obscure life in chapter 21, verse 1 through 4. 21, verse 1, he looks up and saw the rich dropping their offering into the temple treasury. So there's this temple court, maybe kind of like our offering box, maybe a little, I heard they are trumpet sized. I don't know where that person got it from. But like a trumpet type thing, you're just dropping your coins in, right? And there's receptacles all throughout the temple, and people are bringing their gifts because remember, this is a high holy season in Jerusalem during Passover. And he sees the rich, the very people he warned his disciples against, kind of parading. You know, they got their robes, they got their little swag, they got their big bag, they're shaking with coins. Skadoosh, it's making a loud noise as it's going down. And there's a lot of hubbub, and people are surprised at that. But then Jesus turns and he sees a poor widow that no one else notices. She kind of gets bumped or skipped in line, and she comes and she brings 2 tiny coins. Click, click. And he says, disciples, be like that. So that's where we're going to turn the example of a beautifully obscure life. This widow wasn't trying to be seen. She wasn't trying to get recognition or be the center of attention. She was quietly giving her all to the God who knew her and loved her. And I just want to lean in here. There is an encouragement for faithfulness in obscurity here. Most of your life will be spent doing small, unseen, thankless acts. You may have your 5 seconds of fame. That would be pretty cool. You know, someone at ROG getting 5 seconds on fame on YouTube for something good. But most of your life isn't highlight reels. It's just serving in the background, on the backstage. And that can deflate us quickly. Maybe some of you are feeling that right now. But Jesus helps us reevaluate these small forgotten lives. And before we dive into the encouragement, I just want you to think, maybe get an area in your life that you feel overlooked in. So just take a moment to think, what area of life do you feel most overlooked in? It could be at work, home, in a relationship. And maybe this will cue you off onto what that area is. What area in life do you feel kind of a growing bitterness or resentment like? Why aren't people seeing me here? It might be a project at work or things you're doing in a relationship. Like, why aren't people seeing me? You're getting bitter that you're being overlooked. Well, let's take that area of your life and let's dig into this encouragement that Jesus has for us. First, Jesus sees you in obscurity. Jesus sees you. We have to ask, what kind of religion catches Jesus' eye? In Jerusalem at this time, there are a lot of religious people packing into the city. And what catches Jesus' eye? It's not the rich who are parading themselves to give their huge gifts off. It's this widow with 2 tiny coins. He gets excited about her. He celebrates what's going on in her life, in her small act. And he directs his disciples to her as an example of genuine religion and faith. I like to think about this. This woman is probably, she's the GOAT. She's the greatest giver of all time. And we'll see that in a second. She's the greatest giver of all time. And if Jesus hadn't pointed her out, none of us would have ever heard of her. No one would have seen her. No one would have called attention to her little life. She was in a sea of worshipers, and yet Jesus singles her out. So in that area, take that area where you feel overlooked, small, insignificant, and if you're living faithfully, if you're doing small deeds with big love for God, Jesus sees you, and he rejoices over you. And he calls the heavenly host to attention and rejoices over your small faithfulness. So Jesus sees you in your obscurity. Jesus also honors you. Now this widow gave 2 tiny coins that were worth, a denarius, I think, was kind of a coin that was your daily wage, okay? This widow gave 2 coins that was 1/132nd of a daily wage in that day. So this was like less worth than a penny. Okay, that's how much this woman actually gave to God. And this is what Jesus says about this woman. Look at verse 3. Truly I tell you, he said, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. This poor widow with her 2 tiny coins, that's way less than pennies, she gave more than this whole line of rich folks that were just dumping in their huge bags of coins. And the reason is, of course, not numerically she gave more, but because she gave all she had. That's all she had to live on, were these 2 coins. She didn't give one and hold back. She gave both. She gave her all to God, who gave his all for her. And so he honors her. And I just want you to hear that too. If you're doing a thankless job or a thankless project at work or whatever, if you're doing that in faith, if you're doing that in Jesus' name, he sees you and he honors you for that. I remember, speaking of these 2 little coins, it reminded me of Grandpa DeLorme. I knew him as an older man, of course, and he used to have this big jar in his room where he would just fill it up with pennies. And like, if we were out and about, like Grandpa DeLorme, like even with his bad back, he'd like stoop down and pick it up. I was just like, Grandpa, you should probably just leave that. It's not worth much. But he would pick it up, and it was really instructive to me when we took it, to the bank. It's that, I don't know if they still have those machines where you dump in the coins. That thing is awesome. Yeah, I want to take a field trip there. You just dump it in. It's just going clanking all down and it's adding up. You feel like you're winning the lottery, It's like $13. It's like, yo, Grandpa, that was $13. You're the man. You are wise after all. And as a little kid, that's a massive sum. But when we talk about honor, Jesus doesn't forget every single penny that you put in the jar. Jesus doesn't forget every diaper that you change. Every time you clean up a back corner of the office that no one has touched for months. Every time you say a prayer for a loved one or for a neighbor. Every small act of faithfulness, Jesus just piles those up in his jar. It says that when he returns, that he will honor us for all the things we did, all those little works that we did in faith for him and out of love for other people. And it's going to be a beautiful sound as Jesus just pours out that honor on his people for all eternity. It's going to be way better than little Elliot seeing that the pennies are going to $13. It's going to be a glorious time receiving that honor from our King for these little acts of faithfulness. Hear this. Jesus cherishes every unreturned, unrecognized act of kindness. Every single one. He says, if you give a little kid a glass of cold water in my name, that's awesome. That's beautiful. Now you might be thinking, I'm young, what can I do for God? Or things are financially tight, what can I give to God? And this just reminds us that Jesus calls us to give him our all, wherever we're at. Now the Bible, in several places, doesn't call us to give everything and be totally bankrupt. That's why she's the GOAT. There's very few people that actually do this. In fact, in 1 Corinthians, it says that I encourage you, gather up money according to your means, so that when you gather on the Lord's, that you could give according to your means. But even something small is beautiful. If you're going to a church potluck and you're kind of struggling for money, you maybe just bring a bag of chips, a bottle of Coke, something small. That is beautiful to Jesus. If you don't have a lot of time, you're in a busy season of life, just giving a little bit of time to pray for a neighbor, to help someone in your house or in your neighborhood, that's beautiful to Jesus. So I know a lot of us might feel like I'm strapped on cash or time or even on gifting. I don't even know what I'm good at. But this is an encouragement to just take what little we have and give it to Jesus in love. The final encouragement here is that in the obscurity, in your smallness, in your unseenness, you get more of Jesus. You walk with him. Jesus is your companion in obscurity. The Gospel of Luke is kind of a weird biography. You know, if you're into reading biographies, usually it starts from parents, grandparents, goes through the birth, and just walks chapter by chapter through a person's life. The Gospel of Luke and the other Gospels are kind of weird in that way. They'll spend a couple chapters up front on the birth narrative and maybe the first couple years of Jesus. You might get a paragraph on when Jesus was 12, and then it skips all the way forward to when Jesus is an adult. It skips that huge chunk of Jesus' life where he was just in his father's workshop, being an apprentice carpenter, learning the masonry trade, and he's just working, having meals with his family, going to synagogue, getting splinters, getting sick, celebrating people's parties, all these things. He's just living a small life in a small town in obscurity, and he was fellowshipping with his Father. So I think that silence speaks louder than words in the Gospels, that huge gap of his life that we really don't know anything about. Because in reality, when you look at our gravestones, there's going to be a huge gap. Our birthday, our death day, and a hyphen. But Jesus meets us in that hyphen. He walks with us in the obscurity. Because we are known by Jesus, we don't have to claw and scrape to be known by people who we think are important. So this is pretty ordinary stuff. I love what Brother Lawrence says. I don't have it here, sorry about that. But Brother Lawrence was a monk who wrote this beautiful little book called The Practice of the Presence of God. And it actually wasn't printed till after he died. But Brother Lawrence, he was a very humble monk. He fixed shoes. That was kind of his thing at the monastery. It's a humble work. He did the dishes. And yet what you'll find in the pages of The Practice of the Presence of God is that he rejoiced in who God was through every little thing. He had one of the richest prayer lives in all of church history. And he teaches us that we could practice the presence of God even in the most mundane things. And he says this, that we ought not to be weary of doing little things for the love of God, who regards not the greatness of the work, but the love with which it is performed. So he's saying God isn't looking about how big or small the thing that you do for him, but that the heart of love, how big your love is towards him. So what does this mean for us going back to the workplace or to the home this following week? I remember I had a teacher at school. He gave us devotional on eye service. I was like, what? The Bible version I was reading at the time, Good Bible version, talked about eye service. And we'll pull up these verses here. This is from Ephesians 6, verse 5 through 7. And it says, this is instructions. Paul is giving instructions to slaves in the Roman Empire. And this is what he says to them. Bondservants, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with a sincere heart as you would Christ, not by the way of eye service as people pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, rendering service with a good will as to the Lord and not to man. We could leave that up there for a second. But I remember I was working at a grocery store. I won't say which one, so they don't come calling on me for my poor work at this juncture. But yeah, I remember hearing this devotional work, go to school in the evening. I'm thinking, eye service? Is that even English? What's eye service? And I was sweeping back where we compressed the cardboard and whatever, and I was shooting off a text, and my manager comes around the corner, dropped the phone right away, started hitting this. I was sweeping like a beast. He went around the corner, picked up the phone, and I said, eye service. I just did eye service. I worked when my manager's eye was on me, and that's what Jesus is saying, don't do that. And so as we go back into the workplace, go back into our week, hear Paul's words here. He's saying, don't work just when the manager's watching. Don't be minimizing YouTube or ESPN or Twitter or whatever. No. Work as bondservants of Christ, because your boss has a boss, and his name is Jesus. And he always has his eye on you. And he's there to support you, to encourage you in whatever space you're working on. And it says, do the will of God from the heart, like this woman who gave her 2 coins. She gave from her heart with a good will as to the Lord and not to man. I love this old Latin phrase, coram Deo, before the face of God. Let's go back into our obscure, small, but significant lives, coram Deo, before the face of Jesus, knowing that he sees every small act, that he honors it, and that we have fellowship with him in it. Last Christmas, I went to a play at the Palace Theatre in Manchester with my daughter Lucy. We went to see the Christmas Carol. And as we were enjoying this beautiful play, Ebenezer Scrooge, that guy just crushed it. Ghost of Christmas Present? Oh, I don't know. The sparkly one. She crushed it. She did great. And we were just enjoying this play. And we got our program, and we're looking at the list of all the actors and actresses. And you go through like the lead actors and actresses, and then you start getting to like Kid 1, Kid 2, Street Sweeper 1, Street Sweeper 2. And I was just amazed that mostly those were little kids, some adults, like those people who were in the background did their part, played their part perfectly. If they were supposed to be singing and just making background noises of festivity in the back, they did that, clinking their tankards and all that. If they're supposed to be melancholy, they did that. All these background actors and actresses did excellent. And I just wonder, what if we could follow their example? We are tiny on the grand stage of history, and yet we know and love the main character. The producer of the whole story knows and calls us by name and loves us. Think about how freeing it would be to accept your small script. God has given each one of us a small script to live out and to play our part faithfully and with great love to our God. Let's pray for God's help to do that.